Hey everyone, you're listening to The Talent Revolution, where we believe that focusing on quality over volume and being different, not better, is the right way to hire the best humans and build stronger teams. To help you do this, I go behind the scenes with forward-thinking recruiters, employer brand experts, and people leaders that are making a huge difference to their organizations. I'm your host, Tom Hackwell, and on today's episode, I'll be speaking with Danielle Colonto, Director of Global Talent Acquisition at Yotpo. Danielle spent her career scaling diverse high-performance teams around the world. Having grown up in the fashion and retail space, she's developed talent strategies to support new brand and market launches. While living abroad in Australia, Danielle pivoted into the startup space where she learned about tech stacks and how to read the weather in Celsius. Most recently, she's combined her love of shopping and technology in her role leading global talent acquisition at Yotpo, an e-commerce marketing platform that just hit unicorn status and plans to hire over 300 people in 2021. Danielle, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
I'd love to kind of introduce you a bit more, right? Like we understand what you do right now, and we'll get to Yotpo in a minute, but take me through Danielle to date, right? Like how did you get into the space? What have you been doing so far?
Yeah, so it's actually, a story like many others where I graduated from uni out in California. I went to school out at USC and graduated with a degree in political science because, I thought I was going to go to law school. Who doesn't? I was ambitious. And then reality hit and I, on accident, happened into the fashion and retail sector. Kind of a friend knew someone and I landed there and I just love the business of it. I'm a consumer, so it really made sense to understand the behind the scenes of it. And I really loved the energy and it was fun. It was really, really fun. And I had the opportunity to work for brands like Gap, which is Gap Inc., where I started my career and really build the fundamentals of business acumen and pace and velocity and scale. And really that set the tone for knowing that I was going to build my career there. And so I then moved to American Eagle, which was fun and denim, and we wore flip-flops to work, and it was just a really fun environment. And there I was fortunate to surround myself by amazing people. I had an incredible mentor, Carmen, really kind of handed me the keys to the castle. I was doing a lot of things very early on in my professional career, and I helped scale the Aerie brand, which Aerie by American Eagle is now a rival of Victoria's Secret. It wasn't then. We were opening new stores. We were trying to get people to understand what the heck Aerie was. It was a really fun time. And I continued to want to diversify my career in fashion retail, so I moved more into the luxury and wholesale space. So I worked with Armani and Tory Burch, did a few years spending time selling bras and panties with Victoria's Secret, this mammoth organization. And so I really diversified my experience within the fashion retail segment. And I loved it, and I still eat and breathe it as a consumer. I really understood the business from the other side, which was important to me, And then through a stint, which you mentioned earlier, life happens. I met someone who is from the other side of the planet, which is what brought me down to Australia. And they have an incredible startup ecosystem down in Sydney. And I was very fortunate to be immersed amongst amazing founders and software engineers and all these things that I had no exposure to previously, B2B SaaS, I didn't even really know what that meant. And that's where I launched my startup career in tech, which was fun and hectic. And I was working with a really small company called Propeller Aero that we were doing everything. All of us were doing everything. So we just figured it out. Through that, once I decided I wanted to move back to New York, Australia is quite far from New York and my family's all here on the East Coast. We made the decision to come back. And at that point, I really wanted to marry the love of fashion and retail with technology. Through networking, as is the best way to hire people and connect with roles, I found Yotpo, which is where I am now. And I've been tasked, myself and my team, to build a lot of new roles out here as we continue to scale and grow. It's been a pretty epic few months for Yotpo.
You have kind of a rare perspective, like a massive commendation, by the way, for not just changing like sector or role, but also location and industry and organizational size kind of all in one fell swoop. So massive props there. I'm interested in learning more about how that transition went in a minute. But I think before we dig too deep into that, let's just finish the story with Yotpo, right? So give everybody a bit of context as to what Yotpo is, what stage the organization is at, and sort of the role you've come into play there.
Sure. So We're at an incredibly exciting stage. There's a ton of energy here, and I've just announced a Series F round of funding for $230 million. And so we've hit unicorn status, which in the tech world is such a buzzy world. Our co-founder and CEO, Tomer, likes to say we've hit flamingo status because flamingos being bold and unique. And unicorn, kind of that terminology is a little played out. And so we talk a lot about building our flock. Flamingos operate in flocks. They're super collaborative. They rely on each other. Our flock is growing. So what we do, we are an e-commerce marketing platform, and we support reviews and ratings, loyalty and referral, SMS marketing tools, and visual user-generated content for our clients who are all e-commerce across various spaces. You've definitely used us in some capacity if you've ever shopped online. You just might not know that it was powered by Yotpo. Patagonia, Steve Madden, Rebecca Minkoff. We have a huge road ahead of us. So we're going from about 520 employees now. We're adding on another 300 roles over the remainder of 2021. And so in my role, I lead global talent acquisition across each of our locations, which is here in New York. Over in the UK, we have quite a few go-to-market roles as well. 2 locations in Israel, also have a site in Bulgaria, and we have hired the first team member in Australia, and we'll be scaling down there about 20 roles over the next year to really dig into the business across APAC. So lots of things going on around the world.
Yeah, I mean, that's awesome and crazy at the same time, right? And I think the global part of your title gives me kind of room for pause when you mention all of those different locations and time zones and stuff, right? You've got not just the challenge of scale, but that international scale and all of the differences across those markets. You kind of talk really openly about 2 key, like, important driving themes of recruitment in today's landscape, right? Like, we talk about this notion of kind of recruitment being like selling, not buying. And we talk about the importance of like what we call radical transparency through the recruitment process. And I want to kind of pick apart both of those concepts today, right? And so to dig right into that, what do you mean when you say recruitment is selling, not buying? What does that actually mean in practice?
In practice, it means that the candidates are our customers. Where previous state, I think, we went and shopped around and thought we had the pick of the litter of anyone wanting to work with you. And these days, that's just not the case. So you really have to work at making sure that candidates understand who you are, what you're doing. There's a lot of time and energy, a lot of hand-holding that goes into recruitment, more so than I've ever seen, specifically in a smaller tech startup. And I know we'll dig into this, but when you don't have the brand recognition and the flashy lights of the Googles and the Facebooks of the world, you've got to work for it. You've got to work really hard to make candidates understand why you're an exciting place to work, why they'd want to make a life change and work for you.
I know you talk about this being a bit of a shift, right? And you're working harder now than you've ever been. This hasn't always been the case, frankly, has it? Right? Like when has this shift started, and is it different industry to industry and sector to sector and company to company?
I would say absolutely. The individualization between segments and industries and even location. In my experience and within my network, we've been talking about the last 3 years in particular, it's really started to shift. Of course, compensation is important to people, right? Who can argue that? But the other total rewards of working somewhere have become more important to people over the last few years. So money doesn't talk as much. Again, it still does. But that shift in organizations, offering free lunches and not just tech startups anymore, but everyone needing to have these comfortable, enjoyable environments. That was really not the case 5 years ago. Specifically to tech startups, it was a bit of a shock when I entered the ecosystem and I was coming from large brand names that people wanted to work for. I mean, we had no shortage of CVs, right? So for us, it was quantity and quality. When I was working at Armani, who doesn't want to in the fashion industry work at Armani? So it was really easy. It was really a matter of fending off candidates and understanding what we wanted versus that perspective has totally shifted. And candidates entertain multiple offers, especially post-pandemic as things are picking back up again around the world. We're seeing this. It's moving really quickly as well. And that's where the transparency piece comes in to really show them who you are. Office spaces, well, no one goes into the office really anymore. It will continue to shift, but no one cares about the ping pong tables anymore. It's who they're working with and the impact they'll have, the scope of their work. That stuff matters.
You talk about the ping pong table not being important right now, and you talk about people not being in the office, and it's the people you work with and the things you're doing and the mission and stuff. Do you think that shift has made it easier for lesser known brands to compete with the big picture names that everybody historically gravitated towards? Like, is it easier now for Yotpo to compete with Google for talent versus 5 years ago?
My gut reaction to that is it's still an uphill battle to compete with the Googles of the world. People don't care as much about that anymore. It's not going to be the sell factor. It's now the threshold. The gorgeous kitchen that's fully stocked and keeping people energized in this beautiful collaborative space. But that is just an absolute non-negotiable anymore. So the stakes are just that much higher. And unfortunately, too, in an environment like this where people go out looking, where do they go first? The places they know. And where people aren't spending as much time together socializing, that ability to network and say to your friends, oh, I heard about this cool place, Yapo and Stephanie works there. That's not happening as much. So the reliance factor on brand name, I think, has actually, if anything, maybe become more significant.
One of the other things you just said when you were going through your overview of what that actually means in practice, right? What it means to be selling, not buying, is everybody wants to work for Armani. So Armani's job is actually fending CVs and fending people away. They're not fighting for talent the same way you might be now. Do you think they see themselves as selling, not buying, or do you think they're still firmly in that buying camp? And when will that change?
Yeah, I have friends, my friends that work at Armani now run HR at Gucci, and Gucci is an amazing luxury brand, and they've been performing incredibly well. So lots of people want to work for them, and even still, they're constantly paying me, who do you know? And unfortunately, retail was hit very hard, specifically traditional retail over the last few years, and so it's certainly shifted. Social media has I think shifted how people look at brand recognition when it comes to applying for, in this example, like the Armanis and the Guccis of the world. There's other places that now people are vying to work with and for, that have a different interest level for people. So it just all continues to evolve year by year, day by day.
Literally day by day, right? And yeah, couldn't agree more. I think one of the things, as I say, that you have, which is fairly unique, you've sat on both sides of the table type equation, right? Like you've seen both perspectives front and center, and although things have changed over a period of time, like you still have context and understanding of both sides. Like, are there clear lessons that you can take from one and apply to the other, or vice versa, in terms of the differences between how super well-known brands in, say, the fashion sector are recruiting versus what you're doing today in technology?
Hugely. I mean, one of the things from coming from a fashion and retail background is, one, the hustle. The hustle is real. And, that's something that you, need to exemplify in your role. Like, we were working, I had partners that were in stores. At Victoria's Secret, I was responsible for helping to scale talent at the location at Herald Square here in New York City, which was 600 employees in one building. So we had to hustle. So we walk fast, you talk fast in retail. And I think that's very applicable to not only being successful in tech, but also how you talk to candidates about it. I mean, there's a hustle. The hustle is real. So when we go back to that transparency about being like open and honest, the candidate is our client, period, end of story. And coaching our hiring managers through that. So there is this clienteling that needs to be done. It's the same thing as that, selling, right? Because I sold in retail. That's what we did. That was our business. So I think a lot of that, like regardless of brand recognition, it is completely applicable, and I do find myself turning on that switch. There's actually 2 other people on my team now in talent acquisition at Yapo that come from a retail background, and we definitely turn on the retailer switch quite often.
There's just so many takeaways there that are super easy to apply, right? And that makes so much sense to me. I think one of the things you've talked to a lot, and we've just spent a few minutes here talking about the difference between industry and sector to sector, right? How have you identified differences in terms of like candidate expectations, location to location, right? So right now you've got a team operating in lots of different territories, and I'm sneaky and went and looked at your job descriptions earlier, and there's quite a big difference between the way you're positioning Yotpo and the way you're talking about the role and the engagement in general when you look at the roles you've got in Sofia versus the roles you've got in London versus the roles out there in New York, right? And so I think that's amazing, and it sounds like it makes so much sense, but what's the motive behind that?
The reality is, and this is where I rely really heavily on my team, but the complexities of Bulgaria and how we connect with candidates and what the process should look like and what's appropriate in terms of touch point and candidate experience versus the UK, US, Australia, quite aligned culturally. But Israel and Bulgaria, and there's just so many learnings that come out all the time, from a process fundamental, the way that we speak to Yotpo, cohesion is the name of the game, right? So that we have the same data and insights from a by the numbers perspective. But the innuendos of, I thought this was so interesting and the team laughs at me. In Israel, it would be completely appropriate to get a CV in, you pick up your phone, you WhatsApp someone, you get them on the line. And I just found myself at first thinking, well, that's just shocking. You mean you don't schedule the call? And of course we schedule calls too, but it's just way more appropriate. Where can you imagine if that was happening in the US? I mean, nobody's going to answer your phone. So there's just these little niches, and that's where you have to be flexible. There is certainly no one size fits all when it comes to candidates, roles, etc. So we're allowing ourselves as an organization as we scale to, again, cohesion being the name of the game. That one Yotpo language and brand is really important to us because, we want to be talking the same way and have the same kind of competencies and things that we speak about to qualify what success looks like here. But we have to be, it would be silly for us to think that it's a one size fits all. And again, we have a team that is amazing at coaching each other through all of these things. We have really open dialogues about why the differences can happen. And we're not afraid to push back with each other. Sounds great for the US, and that sounds like it's working there. Here are the challenges we see with implementing that in Israel. Yeah, it's certainly not the same. That's for sure.
Through my kind of job at Pinpoint, we have clients all over the world. And I think the biggest thing we've learned is that there is no right answer, right? Like best practice doesn't really exist when you work with organizations in every sector, in every country. Everything is different, right? And as you say, there may be common markets, the UK, US as a prime one, but like people have to be understanding of the fact that a truck driver in the US is going to have a very different candidate experience expectation from an R&D engineer in Tel Aviv. Too often people look to the wrong places for advice. And it's really important when we meet people who are doing so well internationally with such a variety of roles to kind of pick up those lessons. We've talked a bit about selling, not buying, right? And you kind of talked about like what that means. What are the ramifications of getting this right and wrong? If I'm an organization stuck in my ways and I still think of recruitment as a buy-side exercise and I'm happy for candidates to work for me and take my pick, where does that leave me in the market today?
It depends on the organization. If you're okay with that and you're just okay with the CVs that come across are who you want to hire, and that's just it is what it is, have at it. As Yotpo and companies I've been fortunate enough to work with in the past, and the reason I've worked with them is because we want talent. We want people that are coming with perspective, entrepreneurship, diversity. When you think about a diverse group of backgrounds and experiences and the way people can impact the business, the proof is in the numbers, the proof is in the stats of that more positively impacts organizations. Selling is having an amazing candidate experience, right? When you boil it down, that's what selling is. And the transparency piece comes in because I'm not talking throwing $1 million at them and telling them that everything is glorious and gold and, forgetting the ugly stuff. It's that mix of selling an amazing candidate experience so that you feel cared for and having people that you meet along the way feel authentic. People want to work for that. So it's a quite simplistic way of approaching that, but it's completely the reality. We hear it from candidate feedback all the time.
I want to dig deeper into one thing there, right? So like people need to understand how serious the problem is, right? Like if they don't fix this stuff, they are going to be left behind, in your word. The point you were making before, like if you as an organization are happy to sit there and wait for people to apply for your roles and take your pick of the litter and so on, power to you. The reality is that like a lot of these organizations are sort of what I would call unconsciously incompetent. They don't know what they don't know. They don't know that this is bad recruitment. And we speak to a lot of people who will come to us and say, oh, our offer acceptance rate's 100%. People love us. If your offer acceptance rate's 100%, in my book, you're not getting quality candidates, right? You're not playing with the big boys and girls if the quality of the people you're getting means everyone's taking your offer sight unseen. Because that's not what good looks like in today's market, right? The great people have choice, and if you're not seeing people with choice, you're not seeing good people. I think the other thing, though, is that a lot of the people and a lot of the sectors specifically that we see playing the buy-side game, realizing now that like the same talent they were competing for before had choice, right? Like remote's a thing. People are investing more in employer brand now. Like candidates can work somewhere that isn't within 30 minutes of commuting distance from their home, right? And all of a sudden, people who could, quote unquote, get away with a poor sort of buy-side attitude before aren't able to do so anymore. Have you got an example of like a terrible candidate experience from your own past?
An example that immediately pops to mind, an experience with an unnamed e-commerce site that shall remain unnamed. And, in the fashion and retail industry, it's a small world. And I say this all the time to my teams, and I think it's such a simple thing. It's not about the end result, placing a candidate experience. It's that, one, we're humans and everyone should be treated incredibly. And two, you're going to come across these people in life. So to treat them with respect and trust And honesty is real important because when you run into them on the street, you want to feel good about those interactions. And the interaction I'm about to tell you about was not the case. I was applying for a senior head of talent acquisition role. I thought it looked like a really interesting challenge, was really well aligned to my background. And so I got to a stage which I thought, again, from a candidate experience, was a little too early on. I did this massive project before I had talked to any other senior leaders. So I went from kind of phone screen to Zoom screen with really junior people that didn't know much about the role. And then I was hit with this massive project that essentially was build out our strategy, our hiring strategy for the next year. And here are X, Y, and Z. And that's something when you talk about selling to a candidate, I'm really conscious about assignments these days and what we're asking people to do in practice. I think we should be really tempered about that. I think that's something organizations also get wrong. Even more recently, people have far less time on their hands outside of work, and we should be really conscious about that and respect it. And I spent probably 10 to 15 hours, because they wanted it back by the end of the week, doing a pretty robust project for their strategy. And I thought, well, they could implement this, so I hope they hire me because this is a little aggressive.
Sure.
And then I never heard back.
Literally nothing.
Literally nothing. So I emailed, the power of LinkedIn. I emailed the co-founders. I just said, listen, I, at this point, am no longer interested in the role, but you need to know this about the experience. And I gave some bullet points because I do really believe in giving feedback. How do you know you did something wrong as an organization? How can you course correct if you're not told? Which is why we implemented a few months ago consistent candidate feedback from around the world, because it's really important. Again, never heard back. There was just such a lack of respect for me as a candidate. And I found myself thinking, I never want to do that to anyone. Sure, I might be a few days behind. Life happens. But ghosting people is,
There's degrees of acceptability, right? And we could argue that ghosting anybody is unacceptable, but ghosting someone you've done 2 interviews and asked for 15 hours of take-home work for is just ludicrous.
It's a problem. I would say like reputation integrity. And a few months later, a friend of mine who's a senior marketing executive reached out about a role that this same company had. And I said, don't even attempt it.
That's the thing. That's the ramification of these actions though, right? And it's still with you now. When the conversation finishes and the record buttons hit again, I'm going to be asking who this company is so that I know myself, right? This is what the world looks like now. Portraying that employer brand and talking about the pros and the cons and not looking at everything through these super rose-tinted glasses. And I think candidates are more aware of that than ever, right? And they're hunting for those authentic voices.
And I think the vulnerability factor, right? And, there's been many times I haven't provided the perfect candidate experience. You can course correct that by reaching out and just being vulnerable and be like, I cannot believe it took me a week. I apologize for this. There are things going on, but now I'm course correcting, right? There's opportunities to do that and be vulnerable and be human. And people respect that. I think we very much underestimate the power of human connectivity in those situations, that there's very easy ways to right wrongs, if you will.
It's about intent as much as anything else, right? And I think I had an example a couple of weeks ago where someone had applied for a sales role, great candidate, and I'd completely dropped the ball on some comms with them. And by the time I got back to them, it's a fast moving sector. They'd certainly taken a few other later stage interviews, and I reached out and apologized. And the person said, oh, thanks so much. And then I said, oh, well, can I help you prep for something? Or can I give you some feedback on some stuff? Because I understand I don't want their opinion of us to be a negative one from the rightfully terrible experience I'd given them. And it's about righting that wrong. But as you say, it's not difficult to do that, right? And I think people take that at face value and they see when you're owning up to your shortcomings.
And that's why I think the human nature of recruitment is really underestimated as well, the human and human resources. And those are things that can't be automated with AI, and just those genuine connection points. That's on us to own as humans.
You use the word vulnerable, which I love, right? But applying for a job is a vulnerable time for people, right? People are putting themselves out there to be judged. And this is a big life event. It's so easy to forget what that thing behind that row in that spreadsheet or that ATS is. And I think it's important we remember that. But let's move on a little bit and talk about recruitment transparency and what that really means, right? So what is recruitment transparency from your perspective?
Being very honest about the good, the bad, and the ugly. And when I talk about that, I mean from 2 lenses. The candidate lens, of course, we've been talking about candidate experience, and that's our client. But from a recruitment perspective, we owe to our hiring manager, our key stakeholders internally, our internal clients, the exact same thing, hold ourselves accountable, be really honest about what's working and what's not. That's why our team, we're certainly not the transactional recruiters where you hand over a CV, run with it, you hand over another CV. Like, we're really influencing the way to think differently about poking holes in what we're doing and how can we continue to do things better. There isn't a magic solve in recruitment, as you know. It takes a lot of time and energy and thought. If I had the magic wand to get all the awesome people in seats tomorrow, I would do it. But we really rely on our hiring managers we coach them through having the same level of authenticity around, I say the good, the bad, and the ugly. We've all been there where you've got good Glassdoor reviews and you've got some tough ones. I've seen it in every organization I've ever worked in. I never like the challenging ones because it's uncomfortable and it makes you not feel great. But we've had in previous life and here, there's been commentary around, on Glassdoor, and when those posts come through, we make sure that as a team we're talking about it, and we're getting a lot better at that. As we see a post come across that might have candidates thinking differently about us, we just kind of call it what it is and talk about the appropriate way to address it, either within the phone screen and or from the hiring managers, depending on the type of role, depending on what the commentary is, so that we can get ahead of it. And a perfect example that we used a few weeks ago is, there's some commentary around workload being, like there's a lot going on at Yotpo workload. Yeah, we're a busy company. That's why we're hiring so much, and we just really address it. A candidate asked us about it. And so we brought it to the team to say, what's our kind of united front as a response? We want to be, I talked cohesive earlier, we do want a brand voice and to be on the same page. And we owe that to candidates, and we owe that to ourselves as a company, that we're all a united front and have the same perspective of, it's busy here. It is busy. You're definitely not going to be 9 to 4:30 p.m. with a 2-hour lunch, because we are working on stuff. We are owning projects, and we've grown so much. Our sales have increased tremendously, so we need more people. That's where our team comes in. And it's funny. It went from this being a really negative, uncomfortable thing to just let's just pretend that we're not busy, to actually, the ownness around it and the way that candidates, their feedback after we were really honest. It was even shocking for some of the hiring managers to say, oh, well, that was easier than I thought. We were just telling them the truth and addressing it, versus the dancing around, one person had a bad day. No, call it how you see it. And that's the authenticity. And people recognize that. And, that's why, as I hire for my team, that authenticity as a competency is pretty core. It's a hard thing to measure for, but we try to dig into that as we recruit for our team so that we can be those gatekeepers of keeping it real.
To me, the takeaway there is just got to own the narrative. And I think it's not on you to be perfect, and it's not on you to pretend things aren't as they are, but it is on you to be authentic, and it is on you to understand the perspective that the candidate might have coming into the conversation. And as I said, I wouldn't have been doing my research if I'd not looked at your Glassdoor reviews, and I think they're great, right?
Overwhelmingly good, I will say that.
But I mean the bad ones I think are great. And what I mean by that, and we talk about this a lot here, right? But we want our EVP here at Pinpoint to put candidates off. You said before, your hiring managers, maybe they were taken aback by how smooth the conversation went when they addressed the critical feedback. Yeah. I think from my perspective, the conversation goes really well with the right candidates. It doesn't go so well with the wrong ones, right?
And that's a very valid point. Someone that's going to be turned off by reading that Glassdoor review and not addressing it, and or getting a bit panicked and anxious. And, and again, my philosophy is when you come to the table with addressing it transparently and the whys that you see, right? And then also potential solutions that are being in place, in this case, hiring. And what I will say, just spending a moment on Glassdoor, is there's all sorts of extremes there, and we have the luxury where I am now of the balance is predominantly genuinely good feedback. Thank you for that. But because I've worked in places where that is not the case, and you're consistently combating it, you feel like you're always on the defense. So when it does happen in a place that's not used to it, it becomes a little bit more of a thing, and all the more reason we wanted to take it seriously. Of course, but I will say that, one of the things I'm really fortunate about at Yotpo is there's overwhelmingly the feedback is, even if it is a comment with some critical feedback, it's, I love the team.
I spent far too much time, because I'm a sad little man, reading all of your Glassdoor reviews, and that was the whole narrative, right?
It's a theme.
Team are great, love the people, founders inspirational. It's just too much work for me, right? And the reality is that's not a loss for anybody, right? That person should go find a role that's more suited to their requirements, and people like that person shouldn't join Yotpo. but that's good for you, not bad for you, right? And I think if your EVP is not weeding out bad fit candidates, you're just creating more work for yourself. And so like I love to see stuff like that, because candidates are doing that research, right? And if candidates go on Glassdoor pages and there's nothing but rosy reviews with no criticisms whatsoever, they're not stupid. You talked to me before about job descriptions, right? Like, give me some narrative on job descriptions in the context of transparency.
Yeah, so it's actually a place that we're spending a lot of time doing work on job descriptions. I mentioned the idea of cohesion, right? Like there's one kind of brand story, and we've grown so quickly that it's more important for us to just get the job up and posted to facilitate some traction. And we have more work to be done. We're actually in process to engage with a vendor on debiasing our job description. So we've kind of started slow. You know, when you think about transparency, it's a job description should show about the organization, about the role, like really be honest about the type of scope of work there. And that's where we really push with the hiring managers to say, is that really what they're going to be doing? You're never going to capture it all, but to really provide a scope of how they'll have impact. But also a lens of like, let's make this inclusive to a broad variety of candidates. If you don't meet 100% of the qualifications outlined above, that's okay. Nobody's perfect, ... We've got some more. We believe in hiring people, not just skills. And that's where kind of I get stuck in job descriptions sometimes. Quite frankly, I think sometimes we spend far too much time curating and changing and editing. Sometimes you just got to get it up, make sure the framework is appropriate and correct, and move on. And then the evaluation and the real transparent dialogue with a candidate happens once we can get them in the door and have that conversation. And again, things that are important to us, like talking about how Yotpo believes in diversity and inclusion, like how that shows up more throughout the job description as well, so that people reading this know it's important to us. We want them to know that it should be important to them if they work here. People
do spend a lot of time on job descriptions, and there's room for that. And I think really encouraging to hear you're bringing in a third party to help you kind of debias and at least evaluate the perspective on D&I within your job descriptions. But like the best written job description in the world is useless if the right candidate took a job an hour before it was posted, right?
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah. I think like building on that, before we move to the kind of internal stakeholder piece of this transparency around recruitment, like you talked to me earlier and you said, because I was super complimentary about your candidate experience and the way things were positioned there and the differences and so on, and you said, oh, actually we're evaluating this and we're making some fundamental changes here. Like, talk me through that. What's not worked well for you in the past, and how are you making some changes to improve that?
What's really cool about working at Yotpo right now is they had built amazing fundamentals across the business, right? Like this was not a role where I came in and had to build things from scratch. It really wasn't. Like there were teams here before that had done a lot of that nitty gritty. We're in this awesome place, especially after a round of funding, of kicking it up a notch, like maturity in what we're doing. And again, not to take away what had been accomplished before, but just elevate. Like we've got the funding, we have amazing leaders and teams in place. Like where should we be looking? How much more strategic can we operate? And so job descriptions being kind of a low-hanging fruit part of that, honestly, but really ramping up our structured interview processes. It's something that had been implemented before, but it allows us to hold ourselves accountable and create consistency. Our job page, our career page, I am very excited. I was doing a lot of work this week. Our marketing team will be giving it a huge refresh over the next few weeks. So that becomes our source of truth for candidates. Right now we have a pretty traditional job page. The career page is a list of jobs, right? And it works. But, investing in a time and energy into getting that right, it's a lot. And we're fortunate that we're at a place to do that. The marketing team has been looking and doing quite a bit of research of who does it right, what does right look like. And so that will be a source of truth to really speak openly. And we've talked about that, how it actually represents Yotpo, the people that work here, interesting things about the work that we do, how we work, how people have had career transitions and progression here, etc. Earlier, we were kind of talking about how social media has changed things. People do their research and they go onto your career site and they're expecting some meaty information about who you are, how you do it, why I'd want to work there. So we're going to go through and kind of scrape everything from benefits. Like we don't actually list that within our career page, but it's really important. But there's a lot that we're looking at kind of again from the process perspective as well. So that's sort of some of like the external low-hanging fruit. Structured interview process. We're going through a round of interview training with our hiring teams. We have a lot of new to Yotpo leaders or new in maybe in a leadership role, new to hiring or both. And so we're doing a lot around that to make sure that our teams feel They have the fundamentals. They're confident in their skill set of interviewing, and you're not just being transparent, being able to talk to a candidate and their role as a brand ambassador, but that we are evaluating candidates equitably and taking the right things into consideration as we make decisions and holding ourselves accountable to using a framework of rubrics of that evaluation so that we remove bias from the process as well. So there's a ton of work being done around each of those segments.
So building on that a little bit, right? So we've talked about the importance of the candidate side and being transparent with the candidate and kind of front loading every piece of that puzzle. And you've just alluded to it a little bit here, right? But expand for me on the internal piece, right? Like, how are you engaging your team? How are you being transparent with them? How are you running the recruitment process as it stands today?
I go back to who we're hiring onto the team as recruiters. Our talent acquisition partner in our world as Yapo is, again, not that traditional kind of hand over a CV and be done with it and we're moving on. It's a really influential business partner that can push and pull. And when I say that, I mean, our teams like to be challenged. I love that about Yapo. We're not afraid to speak openly, give ideas and suggestions. And our team are massive influencers in that, to think differently about everything. We're using data more and more. It's something that as we kind of have really turned on our applicant tracking system and by the numbers to say, hey, we try new things to engage with teams. And then we're pretty honest. We do debriefs and we do kickoff meetings, quite traditional, but that's where we're talking about, hey, this is working, this isn't. Candidate shared X feedback with us. If a candidate does accept the offer, we're talking about the whys behind that. If a candidate does not accept an offer, which we have a pretty high acceptance rate, I think we're hovering at like 89% globally right now. I agree with you 100%. You're probably doing something wrong because you're not with the most competitive candidates if you're always getting it right.
Yep.
But we're talking about that. So what didn't work? We also get candidate surveys that we've implemented by site over the last few weeks, and majority good feedback, which makes us feel good. However, when we have that critical feedback come through, we talk about it, we share it with the teams, and we don't sweep it under the rug and just hope it doesn't happen again. So those are some of the things. And we're also just sharing around best practices too, as we're saying, hey, this candidate talked about X piece of the process at this other company being really interesting. I believe very strongly the talent acquisition team is gatekeepers for talent and brand ambassadors and employer branders, but we're also those market researchers. You hear a lot of things coming in from across the market, and most of the candidates we're speaking with, especially these days, have 4 or 5 other processes in play, and they're giving us insights, and we're learning from that, and they're telling us what they like and don't like about other processes. And our teams are incredibly open to thinking differently about what does and doesn't work. And as we ramp up, there's things that we know we need to do differently to move more quickly. So we're fortunate that we have highly influential recruiters and incredibly receptive and collaborative hiring teams and stakeholders that are like, yeah, let's try something different. Let's measure it. If it doesn't work, moving on, we'll do something else.
We've talked at this kind of macro level about recruiting being sales, right? And I think a lot of the things you just said to me sort of ring true with my experience actually in the world of sales before recruitment, right? And I think like you're talking about people being in market for multiple solutions, right? Like your customers are your potential candidates and they're evaluating you as a provider of employment as well as a bunch of other vendors offering similar services, and you're getting quality feedback from them. And you're using that to iterate on your process and improve the way that you're selling the organization and the role in question to the candidate, right? And I think we've even spoken to orgs that have like battle cards where they know that they compete for the same talent with 4 or 5 similar organizations, and they come up against them again and again and again. And they'll build little battle cards for their recruiters to say, hey, like, here's the message when the candidate says they're also evaluating an opportunity with company A. Here's why we're better. And that's not our marketing spin on it. Here's how we've been told from people who've moved to us from that organization that we offer a better experience. And here's where also they might be better for you, right? And being able to be armed with the information to have a meaningful conversation there, I think it's just like sales. If you want to do sales well, you've got to know the market. And I think the same is true here, right? The last question I've got for you on the people side, and I think it kind of sums up a lot of what you've been talking about, right? Like a lot of this is change. It's a shift in perspective. It's a change in expectation. It's accelerating the pace of recruitment. When you're working with your kind of broader stakeholders, right? So not your talent acquisition team or even your people team in general, but your senior leadership, or on the other side of the coin, maybe a hiring manager. How are you taking them on this journey? How are you helping them understand that this is a sell-side exercise and not a buy-side exercise? And you've kind of peppered us with ideas around like structured interviewing and training on bias and things like that. Like, how are you making sure that every part of the puzzle is sort of doing what it needs to be doing?
Our team and the type of TA partners that we have being highly influential and really hands-on with the process. We recognize that we take for granted. This comes second nature to us. And yes, we're always learning, but our hiring managers, our stakeholders, they're running their part of the business and they're having to do all this other people stuff that is not part of their expertise. So we have a really hands-on partnership with the teams, but we're actually doing a lot of work right now around our hiring process and SLAs associated with what that looks like and where we flex different muscles, where we support, where we don't. Right now we're in a place, quite frankly, where we're super busy and we're coaching our teams through how to source on LinkedIn and how to reach out to people on LinkedIn. And listen, everyone's up for that challenge, right? Our common goal here is get amazing talent to join Yotpo. So there's a variety of touch points, and from a simplistic, like we have each of the team leaders meets with their hiring managers throughout the week consistently, and again have very open, honest dialogues, look at the numbers, go through the pipeline and talk about the feedback that's been received. But depending on the hiring manager and their background, there's a different level at which we're actually involved, whether it's sitting in on a phone screen together and kind of being able to mirror those best practices and hear it from someone. We've actually been thinking about utilizing video software there where we can put together some recordings, kind of like our sales team uses Gong, and we're thinking about right? We can't always be super hands-on with each of our hiring managers. Again, like it's not a perfect solve, it's staying really close and having very consistent conversations because every search is different also. Never mind every hiring manager is different. Every search requires a different type of sourcing and partnership and what's working, what's not. And are we calibrating? Do we know what right looks like? We're hiring a lot of new roles these days, which is super exciting, but we have nothing to benchmark against internally. So how do we know what success looks like? And our team is really influential there, kind of bringing in, again, market knowledge and talking to candidates and helping coach through. It's time and energy spent with our hiring managers.
But that's the takeaway from me, right? Like you're being intentional about it, right? You're not leaving these people to fend for themselves, and you're not going, hey, this is recruitment, turn up for this interview now and get on with it, please. Like, you're bringing intentionality into everything you're doing and you're including the whole business in that, right? And I think you're taking those people on a journey the same way you're taking the candidates on a journey. And what you're seeing on the other side is consistency and quality as a result. And you talk about Gong, we actually use Gong for sales, but also for recording our recruitment conversations so we can learn these lessons and pick out great pieces of advice that people are sharing or great like objection handles and things like that from a recruitment conversation perspective. But like, it's not about specific tools. I think what I wanted people to hear and what you said perfectly was you're intentional about it, right? You own the narrative, you own the conversation, and this is like something that's you're living and breathing every day rather than it just being an afterthought. The one thing I keep hearing from you and the one thing that's blatantly obvious is that like Yotpo's at this super exciting juncture and you've got 300 roles to fill. And I just wanted to say thank you so much, right? This has been amazing. I think there's loads of content and best practice advice out there. But hearing perspectives and learning lessons from people like you are actually implementing these things, especially at the scale at which you're doing it at Yotpo, is invaluable. Shout out opportunity. Where do people go to learn more about you and your experience and also to learn more about Yotpo?
Yeah, so connect with me on LinkedIn. We are hiring like mad. So if you go to yotpo.com/jobs, you're going to find all of our site locations. Everyone is hiring, every team. So whether you're an engineer in Israel, an SDR looking for roles, a customer success manager here in New York City, everything can be found on our career site. And it is a pretty amazing time to be a part of Yotpo. So I highly encourage people to reach out to us.
Thank you so much. And to everybody listening, for more great tales like this and to get more best practice guidance and lessons from people just like Danielle, please stay tuned to the Talent Revolution. We've got great quality content just like this coming every Tuesday. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and we'll see you in the next episode.